The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.
Welcome back to the show, Cherries fans and West Ham fans. We've got a special for you today. Now, before we get into our Carabao Cup game against the Hammers, here's a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. Now, to find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Now, of course, we drew West Ham United away from home in the Carabao Cup. Of course, it is a game between two Premier League sides. Some people were probably disappointed we didn't get the likes of Colchester United, who were still left in the competition, but hey-ho. Of course, the Hammers have got a new manager in charge. David Moyes is gone. Julen Lopetegui, the former Wolves manager, has come in. Of course, somebody who is from the Basque Country, just like Andoni Iraola, and of course, is well known by Mikel Starry, who we've had on this show as well. Now, of course, I've got a very special and returning guest here on Up the Cherries in all departments. Now, this man is one of the voices of LBC. He's been in the radio circle for a long, long period of time, and he's also written a number of books, including his new book, The Dictators, which is coming out on the 5th of September. It is a pleasure to welcome back onto the show LBC presenter Iain Dale. Welcome back to the show, Iain. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. Good to be back.
Yep, definitely. And good to see you back on LBC. You released your first podcast back with Natasha Clark yesterday called Daddy's Back.
Well, I got into trouble when David Cameron was appointed Foreign Secretary. It seems a long time ago now, but it's only, what was it, last year? And I'd just been to interview Cliff Richard. So the song Daddy's Home was in my head. So I just tweeted a picture of David Cameron and put Daddy's Home and got all sorts of shit for it. So I've been away from the podcast for a month because I've been quite ill. So yesterday was my first one back. So no doubt I'm going to get some flack for that.
Fair enough. Whatever gets the views as well, that's the main thing, really. And are you feeling a lot better as well, Iain? Yeah,
as I say, I got an operation in a couple of weeks, but they told me I'd be operating at 60% capacity up until the operation. But I actually feel as though I'm back to fighting fitness now. So your listeners and viewers can be the judge.
Good to hear it. Good to hear it.
By the way, I've got a complaint before we start.
Go on.
I've just noticed you've got the old West Ham logo on the screen. Honestly, what you like?
I know, because it's our 125-year anniversary. I thought this year we'll use old logo. So I managed to find an old
That's
Newcastle
your excuse,
one.
is it?
Yeah,
right, okay.
that's the excuse. But yeah, do you not have good memories of that logo? Surely.
Yeah, I mean it was. I don't know how long it was our logo for, but they changed it when we moved to the London Stadium. It looks it's still got the sort of crossed irons, but it now says West Ham London, which is apparently a nod to getting lots of fans across the world.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And of course, that was the logo that Harry was in charge of West Ham with,
Yep.
wasn't he? And
Yep.
you know, did manage the club for years and years and years. And he's a bit of a resident on this channel now as well, as you probably realise.
Did I read somewhere he's knocked his house down?
He's actually moved. He's
Right.
moved. I know that much, but yeah, he's probably doing it up. You know, at the end of the day, it's Harry. You know,
Always doing something.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But one thing I did want to do before we get on to the football, I did want to mention your new book, and of course, you write lots of books about historical figures and also
Here's
present.
one I prepared earlier.
Excellent, excellent. And I understand it's got 64 different dictators in there, 64 of the bleeders that have been through history, written as well and contributed by 64 different people. Of course, we've got on there as well the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, I should say, Nadim Zahiri, as well as lots and lots of journalists. And you actually wrote a piece about Leopoldo Galtieri, which I'm going to be honest, I don't know much about him.
Well, it's interesting because most of the dictators in this book are ones from sort of history, but there are quite, I mean, if I go through, there are some recent ones, and we had a bit of an issue with libel lawyers on this because the publishers' lawyers said, yeah, but these ones that you've written about, like that are still alive, they could sue for damage of their reputation. And if I tell you, they range from Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus, Vladimir Putin, Assad in Syria, Xi Jinping, and Mohammed bin Salman. Now, does anyone really think that any of them are going to sue? So we had to sort of tell the lawyers to grow up and grow a pair, basically. But I mean, they range. The first one that starts in ancient Rome. So we've got the fabulous Pisistratus. You've got Alexander the Great, then the brilliantly named Fabius Cunctator. Don't you think that's the most brilliant name? So you've got a mixture of these people that a lot of people will have never heard of. Then you've got Napoleon, Mussolini, obviously Hitler. And the interesting thing is the essays that on the most famous ones, like Hitler, my old university professor, Richard Evans, I got him to write the one on Hitler. And he's the sort of like, he knows more about the Third Reich than anybody in this country. And he's managed to write an original essay about Hitler, which you'd think all of the stuff that's been written about Hitler over the years, it'd be quite difficult to do. Obviously, Gaddafi, Ayatollah Khomeini, Saddam Hussein, that's the one that Nadim Zahawi has written about, because obviously he grew up in Iraq, sort of when Saddam Hussein was about to come to power. And then obviously more recent ones like Mugabe. And you mentioned Galtieri. Well, of course, Galtieri was in charge of Argentina at the time of the Falklands War.
Yes.
And that was really my political awakening, I suppose. It was the first time that there was a sort of major world event that really had an impact on me. And so I thought, well, let's write about him. And it's really interesting to do that. There isn't actually a lot of research material to go on, but it's one of the shorter essays. But so it's one of these books where you can dip in and out of. You don't have to read it cover to cover. And I've done a series of these now on British prime ministers, American presidents, kings and queens, dictators, and then next year it's generals.
Excellent. And you're also coming to the local area as well in September.
I am. I'm coming to, well, I'm first of all going to the Appledore Literary Festival in North Devon, and then just along the coast from you, Budleigh Salterton. I'm doing it, but how grand is this? They've invited me to do a lecture on dictators. I can't remember if I've ever done a lecture before, so it's quite intimidating, sort of, because I can't just do my normal sort of frivolous, fluffy stuff. I've actually got to be a bit serious.
One thing as well, and this is what really interests me about history and your previous work as well, is because a lot of people will shy away. They won't watch the news because there's a lot of bad news, and especially at the moment, we've seen it in this country, but also, of course, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and of course, Israel-Palestine as well. So we've seen all these conflicts happening. But one very good quote I saw this morning was that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. and those who prevent history being taught fully intend to repeat it.
Yeah.
And that's quite true. And it just stuck with me because it just made me think people like Vladimir Putin. And to be honest, if Vladimir Putin wants to come after me and try and sue me, I think he's probably got more
No,
things
he
on
won't
his
sue
hands.
you. He'll just
Yeah.
use Novichok.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, in your part of the world, you should know that.
Well, yeah, exactly.
But you see, he's a really good case in point about this learning from history, because had the West learned from history, and if you don't stand up to dictators, you'll live to regret it. If we had stood up to him in 2008 when he invaded Georgia, if we'd stood up to him in 2014 when he went into Crimea, if we had stood up to Assad, and I mean, when Assad crossed Obama's red line and used chemical weapons, Obama did absolutely nothing. And I think Putin took a lot of lessons from that. And he's just thought, well, the West is very weak. They'll never do anything. I can do what I like. So that's in a large part why he invaded Ukraine, because he thought he could get away with it. Now, the surprise to him has been that the West has been very united and very staunch in its defense of Ukraine. And so instead of effectively the invasion lasting 3 days and that he imagined would end in victory, we're now, 2.5 years on, and the Ukrainians have not only defended themselves, they've now gone over the Russian border, which I don't think anyone expected them to do. And Putin has been made to look a fool.
There's always that fear, isn't it, with the newer dictators, that they have got these weapons of mass destruction. And of course, that was the basis of the war in Iraq all those years ago, that got rid of Saddam Hussein effectively. And that's been, I think, the West's fear with regards to Vladimir Putin. But is it a case that we have to put that to the back of our mind? Because at the end of the day, if he was ever to use one of those, then the reaction is going to be a lot worse for him, isn't it?
Well, I remember when the war in Ukraine first started, I had a lot of people call into my show saying, oh, we mustn't provoke Russia. They've got nuclear weapons. They would use them. And I said, so basically you think we should appease Russia and not stand up to them? And going back to learning the lessons from history, surely we should have learnt that lesson. And I remember about 6 months ago, one of the people that phoned in then phoned back and he said, you know what, I'm no longer worried about Putin and nuclear weapons, because I've worked out that, just as you said, if he uses them, it would actually affect his own people far more than it would anyone else. Now, I mean, obviously it'd have huge strategic implications, but if you use a nuclear weapon on your own border, who do you think is going to die? It will be people in your own country as well. Now, you could argue that Putin doesn't really care about that. A lot of his actions have shown that he doesn't really care about individual human lives, and there are plenty of examples of that in history. But I think if he was going to use a so-called tactical nuclear weapon, he'd have probably done it by now. But you're right. It's always, look, the point of having nuclear weapons is to prevent other people from using theirs, and mutually assured destruction was the phrase in the Cold War. And nuclear weapons have not been used since the Second World War. So that policy has worked. And I mean, you don't hear anybody in this country now saying we should get rid of all of our nuclear weapons unilaterally, which they were doing in the 1980s.
And of course, there is a lot of dictators on there as well. That, of course, Hitler is one of the biggest examples of somebody who was just evil, and just his intentions was pretty much to take over the world. And of course, there was what you would call ethnic cleansing, really, as well.
Yes, I mean, I think you say ethnic cleansing. I mean, in a sense, it doesn't do justice to what he did to the Jews. But everyone, I think if you stop people in the street and said to them, who is the most evil dictator in world history? I think that the majority of people would say Hitler. And you can make a very good case for that. But Hitler killed about 7 million people, all in all. Now, you can say, well, in the Second World War, 20 million Russians died. So I suppose you can add that into the equation. But that, in terms of killing his own people, it was about 7 million. Stalin killed about 70 million of his own people through various means, and so did Mao Zedong in China. So it depends how you judge evil. If it is just on the metric of how many people did they kill or starve or whatever, you'd have to say that probably Chairman Mao or Stalin were more evil than Hitler. And that's not me defending Hitler by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, before I start doing the publicity for this book, because it doesn't come out till the 5th of September, I want to try and draw up a league table of evilness, and I haven't quite decided what metrics to use yet. And I think one of the fascinating things in the book is that there are lots of dictators like Idi Amin, Mobutu, Afwerki, who we've probably heard of, but really don't know an awful lot about. We know that they were bad people, but that's about it. So you don't have to read a whole biography of them. You can read 6 or 10 pages about them in this book. And if you want to pre-order it, you can do so at politicos.co.uk, and I'll even sign it for you.
Excellent. And the link is just down below as well to do that. I think Pol Pot is, which to be honest, we had Johnny Blair on, who's a Bournemouth fan, and he went over to Cambodia and saw the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah.
And I think he's got to be up there. But I guess there's going to be lots of different league tables, and I don't think there's one right, is there?
Well, I think if you do it by proportion of population, Pol Pot would be definitely up there, if not top. You're absolutely right on that. Again, he's one that people have heard of, but apart from the fact that we've heard of the Khmer Rouge, we know he's in Cambodia, what else do we know? And that the other thing is, in this book, there are 1 or 2 that I wasn't sure whether to include them, like Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, who in some ways wasn't a dictator. But I've described him as a benevolent dictator because he was quite authoritarian, but he didn't have sort of killing squads or secret police. It was just a very authoritarian society, but a hugely successful economy. And if you talk to most people in Singapore, they would think of him as a very, very good leader. So every region, every country has different forms. We tend to think democracy is the most superior form of organizing a country. And in general terms, I'd say it is. But I think we've made the mistake in thinking that we can impose it on people in recent years. And you can't do that, as we've seen in Iraq.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, I will definitely be picking up a copy, and so that's 1 book sold already. But let's go on to the football. Of course, Bournemouth are travelling to the London Stadium to face West Ham in the Carabao Cup, and you got a new manager. David Moyes has left the club. Of course, Julen Lopetegui has come in. Now, firstly, about David Moyes. It's a bit of a divided fan base from what I see, and there's a lot of people that feel that, and I'm probably a little bit in the centre of this. A lot of people felt that David Moyes had some great players, and West Ham do have some great players, but he didn't get the best out of them. He was a little bit like a Gary O'Neill, was very, very played safe football, but it was effective, got the results. There's others though that feel that to actually kick on, there needs to be. West Ham are used to playing attractive football. They don't like the David Moyes style, want to play attractive football to actually push the club on. I'm very much in the middle, where I think David Moyes won a trophy. He's done well with West Ham, but maybe it is time for a change. What side of the fence do you sit on?
Well, I think most West Ham fans are very grateful to David Moyes because overall, he is our most successful manager. If you look at win ratios, for example, and you inevitably judge a manager by that, he comes out on top. His style of football was frustrating at times. I mean, not as frustrating as under Sam Allardyce, but because there were games where we played fantastic football. And you thought, well, if you can do it in some games, why can't you do it in every game? And if you have players like Mohamed Kudus and Paquetá, Jared Bowen, people like that, you've surely got to adapt your playing style to get the best out of them. Now, I think that those 3 players did have good seasons last season, but there were so many games where it was just really boring to watch. And in the end, you're right. I mean, Allardyce keeps going on about the West Ham way. Well, I never discovered what that was. Well, I know what the West Ham way is. It is playing fast, expansive football, and we have the players that are capable of doing that. There was a time when the likes of Ian Dowie were our centre forward, and you had players who weren't capable of playing in that way, but we have them now. And therefore, you should play to their strengths. And I think it got to February, March last season, and I think most people had come to the conclusion that David Moyes had probably run his course. And I think he came to that conclusion as well, because, I mean, it depends who you believe, but I think it was essentially a mutual decision. Although I think if David Moyes hadn't decided that his time was up, possibly David Sullivan would have decided it for him. So I think it was the right decision for him to go. I was quite sad about it in a way, because we have had a lot of success over the past few years. They brought in Julen Lopetegui, who I didn't know much about before. And well, we'll see how he does. But he comes with a good reputation from Seville and indeed from Wolves, and he's saying all the right things. A lot of people are saying yes, but his style of play is very much like David Moyes. And actually, in the first game against Villa on Saturday, I did say to the guy that was sitting next to me, "Are you sure David Moyes is gone?" Because there were points in that game that, I mean, there were some really good points, where we played some brilliant football, and it was very fast and attacking. But there were too many points in the game where we sort of reverted to type. Now, given that we've signed so many new players, you can't expect a team to gel on day one or in match one, and you've got to give them time. Though he had only introduced 2 of the new signings in that game. But if you've got most of the players from last season, obviously it is going to take time for them to adapt to a little bit of a different style of play.
Of course, Julen Lopetegui is a Basque manager, and Basque managers, and in fact, I spoke to one of his former coaches and actually the national team manager of the Basque country national team, which was quite interesting, Mikel Extari. And one thing he said was that he was such a good student. He was very, very knowledgeable of the game, likes to play on the front foot, the high press, very much like Andoni Iraola. Now, one of the big concerns for me, if I was a West Ham fan, is looking at what happened at Bournemouth last season. And at the start, it was very, very slow to get going. Our players couldn't play in the way that Iraola wanted them to play. Are you concerned about that, or do you think that he will get time?
I'm not particularly concerned. I mean, we have some pretty difficult games at the beginning of the season. It wouldn't at all surprise me if by the end of September we were in the bottom 3. I mean, we've got, Crystal Palace away on Saturday, then we've got Manchester City at home, Fulham away, Chelsea at home, I think Spurs away. So there's some pretty difficult games coming up. Yeah. So I'm not expecting us to be in the top 6 come the end of September. I'm really not. But I think looking at the players that he signed, I mean, there are 1 or 2 where you think, well, they're not going to get into the team initially. They're there for the future. This Brazilian 18-year-old winger that we signed, Luis Guillaume, I don't see him getting into. He wasn't even in the squad on Saturday. We have a very large squad at the moment. So you had 3 or 4 players who you would normally expect to be on the bench, couldn't even get on the bench. Now, that's a good thing in some ways. And I think there's probably going to be another couple of signings, but they do need to get rid of a few players. So if you're in the market for a striker, Danny Ings is available. Maxwell Cornet, you could have him. Even Michael Antonio. I think they'd probably sell him if someone came in for him. So I think we've got a very rounded squad now, a very talented squad. And I mean, I was looking just before we started this. I looked on the Bournemouth website to go through your squad, and I have to say that there's only about 3 or 4 of them that I've even heard of. Now that may be quite a good thing in some ways, in that you may well surprise a lot of people, because there's going to be some gems in amongst those players that I've never heard of. But and I suspect there'll be quite a few teams that come not to Bournemouth not knowing quite what to expect. But I mean, you seem to have made sort of several signings as well, so and it will take time for those signings to bed in. We started off with Max Kilman, who £45 million. I can't believe we paid two new central defenders. Each has cost 45 million pounds. Max Kilman, who looked really good on Saturday, and Jean-Claire Todibo, who came from Nice. Or was it Marseille, one or the other? I mean, he came on as a sub and looked absolutely outstanding. But we've got a whole new defence. I mean, Emerson is the left back. He's the only one left because Soufal, I think, will be ousted by Wan-Bissaka, who Sam Allardyce says is the best right back in the whole Premier League. Not so good at going forward, but a brilliant defender. So it's going to take a little bit of time for the defence to settle down. But that was our weakest area last season. We shipped 72 goals, which you think the way David Moyes plays, that ought not to happen, but it did. So I'm optimistic that they will be able to settle down come October, November, but hopefully we won't be bottom of the league by then.
It's quite interesting that you mentioned there as well that you didn't recognise a lot of the Bournemouth players, and some of the players that we have actually bought in, are youngsters, but really promising youngsters. That seems to be our philosophy. Is that the philosophy that you feel? Because you have got some aging players, of course. You mentioned Soufal there, Mikel Antonio as well. There's a couple of others that are aging players. Do you feel that is the way that David Sullivan and Karen Brady want to move into, is young prospects that could possibly then be sold on in the future, for a profit?
Well, I think we've always had a mix of players. I think we have got a little bit of an imbalance at the moment. I think that there are quite a few players in their 30s. But they're also, I mean, they've signed Summerville from Leeds, who was the Championship Player of the Season. Now, he came on as a sub on Saturday, and he looked really, really quick. And I think is he 19 or 20, something like that. So you got this Brazilian winger who's 18. I think that there is a reasonable mix, but I think they do want to ship out one or two of the older players. I mean, in midfield and on the wings, I mean, Jared Bowen, I mean, I think he's 25, 26?
Yeah.
You've got Paquetá, who's about the same. Kudos, I think, is a bit younger. But we all know that Kudos and Paquetá, probably this will be their last season with us, assuming that Paquetá doesn't get banged up for the betting scandal. I mean, he'll be off to Manchester City. Kudos, I'd be hugely surprised if he doesn't get picked up by a very big club at the end of the season. So they've also got to think about succession planning there. And they're about to sign Carlos Soler, another Basque player from PSG.
Yeah.
He's 27, so sort of again getting sort of. But I mean, a player at 27 ought to be in their prime. But I think he only got about 12 games with PSG last season. He's a Spanish international, and by all accounts can play in all sorts of different midfield positions. So I think the one that I was very disappointed to lose was Flynn Downs, who went to Southampton, who I think is an absolutely superb player. Moyes never really gave him a chance. But every match he played in, particularly in the European matches, he was outstanding. And apparently I think he was Southampton's player of the season when he was on loan there last season. Yeah. So I was disappointed that they let him go because, again, he's only in his early 20s. But with the rules as they are, the PSL rules, you can only have a squad of so many that are paid so much. And our trouble is we've got Zuma raking in 125 grand a week. His knees are shot, so we're trying to get rid of him. Good luck with that. Danny Ings also on 100 and something thousand a week. Never really fitted in at West Ham, and I don't think he ever will. Cornet is on 60 or 70 grand a week. I mean, if we could get rid of them, that would then open up another couple of spaces.
Of course, Danny Ings, a former Cherry. Do you expect him to start, considering this isn't a Premier League game, do you expect him to come in, or do you think that Julen Lopetegui will put out a fairly strong squad, seeing as it is Bournemouth?
Yeah, I think he will put out a very strong team. If it was a lower league team, possibly not. But I think his main aim at the moment is to integrate the new players. So I think quite a few of them will start. One or two of them need to get their fit. I mean, Rodriguez, who came in from Barcelona, he played on Saturday and didn't have a bad game, but you could tell by the end of it he was gone. So I think he'll start. I think Todibo will come in at centre back in place of Mavropanos. Wan-Bissaka will make his debut on the right. I'm trying to think who the other. Füllkrug, I think he'll probably start. Yeah. Summerville, I'm sure, will start. So I think that he'll put more of the new players in than maybe he was intending to.
How much of a priority is this to West Ham, this competition? Is it because, of course, there's no European place for winning it anymore, which I think.
Not?
I don't think there is. No, I think it devalues the trophy. Of course, the amount of money that you make out of it by winning the competition is a lot lower. Is this really a priority compared to the Premier League?
Well, you can look at this several ways. I mean, we're not going to win the Premier League.
No.
We have an outside chance this season of maybe getting the last European spot, possibly. Mm-hmm. I still think that's a long shot. I think we will finish in the top half, but I'm not sure it'll be 6th or 7th. So in that case, then I mean, West Ham are overdue a cup run. We have never really done well in what I still call the League Cup. The last time we got into a FA Cup final was in 2006 against Liverpool, which I was at in Cardiff. One of probably the best game I've ever seen. Yeah. And I still think we won. Yeah, because it felt like that. It's the only match I've ever been to, particularly of that importance, where the score will show that we lost on penalties. Mm-hmm. But walking out of the stadium, I really felt as if we had won, and the Liverpool fans kept coming up to me and say, "Oh, mate, you really were so good in that. You deserve to win." So I think that we should be concentrating on the cups. I think we should because there've been one or two occasions in recent years where we haven't put out very good teams, particularly in the Carabao Cup. So I would hope that we do give a bit of priority to it, because West Ham fans love a good cup run. We have so many occasions where we've lost to lower league teams or even non-league teams that there's always the chance of something going very, very wrong. But we've had some brilliant matches in. I mean, there was one Carabao. Well, it wasn't called Carabao Cup then. It was about 10 years ago, where we beat Manchester United 4-0 at Upton Park, and Jonathan Spector scored a couple of goals. That sort of thing is never going to happen in the league, but it can happen in the cup.
Well, Matt has just corrected me as well, and he said, "Actually, I've got it wrong. So it is a qualifier for the UEFA Conference League playoff round." So yeah, sorry everybody. Yeah, you do get a European place.
But that is actually a bad thing, because that means that you have to put the team out probably right at the beginning of July, when they've only just come back for pre-season training. So I'm not sure that's necessarily what people would want to happen.
No, that's fair enough. I tell you what, we did this last time round. We played first game of the season last year, got a draw, and then of course we went on a little bit of a bad run after that, where I did question whether or not Andoni Iraola had the players to actually play his style. But let's predict how this is going to go. Iain, do you think that West Ham will get through this game? And do you think you can win this competition, or do you want to really, or prioritise the Premier League?
Well, I do want to win it. I mean, there's no point in entering a competition if your ultimate goal isn't to win it. We've got a squad of players that are perfectly capable of doing so. So I do think we will win on Wednesday. Having said that, we have had some pretty bad results against Bournemouth in the last few years. I won't say you've become our bogey team. I still think that's Everton But I think that we are going to put out a very strong team. I don't know what your manager's intending to do. If it goes to extra time, well, anything can happen. And if it goes to penalties, well, I mean, we've actually not done too badly in penalty shootouts in Europe a couple of times, and indeed, I think the Carabao Cup last season. So I'm not 100% confident we will win, but I think it's more than evens that we will.
Fair enough. I didn't expect you to bet against your own team, and I'm not going to either. I'm going to say that we're going to win, but I think that we will make quite a few changes. I can imagine that Evan Nilsson will play. I can imagine Evan Nilsson will play for the same reasons that you've given as well. Why players will play like Summerville for West Ham, to integrate him into the side, to give him that bit more of a run out. New player, of course, 40 million. Who thought 40 million? Bournemouth were going to sign a player for that amount all those
I
years
don't
ago.
know him. Where's he come from?
He's come from Porto. But a number of teams were after him. Liverpool were mentioned, Newcastle were mentioned, so some big sides. I think Julian Arejo, I'm going to say that wrong every single time, but the Mexican right back, I think he'll probably play instead of Adam Smith.
Doesn't Max Aarons play at right back?
He does, yeah, he does, but he doesn't seem to be getting his game at the moment. But you never know, he might.
Because I was hoping that we would sign him, but when he went to you,
Yeah.
I was quite disappointed because I sort of have a lot of connections with Norwich, and I always watch their games if they're on TV, and he was absolutely brilliant player for them.
Yeah.
And I thought he would do really well for you, but you're saying he's not really an automatic first team player.
Not at the moment. He has, unfortunately, he did have some injury problems last season. And Adam Smith, who, of course, has been a stalwart at the club for so many years, of course, was in the side that got promotion the first time round. He's managed to keep his place, has done very, very well. He's not the paciest of players, but he seems to have got his positioning right, and made a compromise with that. So I think Max Aarons, unfortunately, has kind of been pushed out a little bit of the setup. But I do agree with you. I think he's a fantastic player who's got a lot of potential and a really nice bloke as well. Very, very down to earth.
Because you also had another Norwich player, didn't you? Todd Cantwell, not that long
Yes,
ago.
we did, yeah.
Who again, was one of those players that when he first burst on the scene, I thought he is going to be an outstanding player. And I remember emailing David Sullivan to say he literally only played 5 or 6 games for Norwich. And I said, you need to keep your eye on him. And then he completely went off the boil for Norwich. I don't think he got on with one or two of the managers. And then he went to you on loan, didn't he? But didn't really do much for you.
To be honest, he did all right. He did all right at first, and then there was a game where it was against Reading at home, and we were 1-0 up. We should have probably been further ahead. We should have been probably 5-6 out of sight. And Scott Parker swapped him at half time, took him off, and then really Reading could have actually won that game, which was it dropped off, but I wonder what happened at half time, because after that we never really saw him and he's never really kicked on. So maybe he struggled getting on with certain managers.
He went to, I'm just looked him up. He went to Rangers. He's played 46 games for them and scored 13 goals. Now, I wonder whether he's one of those players that was always going to be good at championship level, but slightly struggled in the Premier League. And I always thought Solanke was one of those type of players as well, because although he did score a lot of goals last season, but whenever I've watched him, I've never quite thought he was the real deal. And I was surprised how well he did last season, and I'm kind of glad we didn't sign him, because we were in for him, I think, at one point. And I watched him against Leicester for Tottenham on Monday. And again, he's sort of slightly flattered to deceive. How disappointed were you to lose him?
I was really disappointed to lose him. The reason being is I think personally he's got a lot of potential more. He was one of the players that really benefited, and I know this sounds really stupid, but he benefited from us getting relegated into the Championship. Of course, Callum Wilson left, Josh King had a little bit of a sulk, Dominic Solanke coming to the side and was starting pretty much every game. The first season he was all right. He did okay. He didn't. Nobody was really that fussed about him at that point. But he got better and better and better and better until last season, and he does so much more than just score goals. He drops back. He brings other players in like Clivert, Billin, Christie, and he creates things for others as well. So, as much as people say, well, he doesn't really score that many goals or didn't in the past, did all right last season. In my honest opinion, it's not just the goals he scores which makes Dominic Solanke.
Yeah, but that's what people always say when a striker doesn't score many goals. Oh, well, he contributes. It's like people who said about Ian Dowie. I mean, I'm not comparing Solanke to Ian Dowie, but oh, well, he lays the ball off well. He's got a good first touch. Yeah, but his second and third are shit. Because I mean, we've had lots of strikers over the years who just haven't cut it in terms of scoring goals, and you can always find sort of parts of their play that you think do contribute to the team, but in the end, they are there to score goals, and if they don't do that, then they need to be replaced by somebody else.
No, I do agree with you on that front. It was a case of, why I was so worried, before we signed Evan Nilsson, is because we've got NSU now, who's joined. I think he looks a really, really, really good prospect. But again, somebody who doesn't really do the rest of the work. I think he will get a fair few goals. Don't think he's going to be prolific of any sense. And the other player last season we had, and eventually was loaned out to Ipswich Town, was Kiefer Moore. And the problem with Kiefer was that he's a bit of a target man. He's a man that you'd expect to put up front and get his head on it. Now, Bournemouth don't play in that style. Iriola doesn't really. It would have been all right under Gary O'Neill, and at times under Gary O'Neill, Kiefer Moore looked excellent. There was a game against Spurs where he really did control the game and really was man of the match. But at the same time, and on the spin side of that, I think, his pace for the style that Iriola is trying to play is just not quick enough. Now, can Kiefer Moore play in the Premier League? Of course, he's gone to Sheffield United. He can definitely play in the Championship. We know that. I think he could, but under certain managers and in certain teams, Everton being one. The long ball, get it up to the big man, get his head on it. That's their style. He's not the most attractive, but at the same time, Sean Dyche doesn't seem to be doing too badly, regardless of what's thrown at him.
Well, he's got to use what he's got, and they keep selling some of their best players. I suspect they're going to lose another couple before the transfer window ends. You mentioned Ipswich there. I was straying off the subject a bit, but they've had a cracking pre-season, I think, in terms of signing players, because I did think, well, they're inevitably going to go down. I'm not so sure now. They've apparently just signed Jack Clark from Sunderland, who, again, top player. They took Ben Johnson from us on a free transfer. He thought he wasn't getting enough game time at West Ham, so I was quite amused to see him named as substitute against Liverpool on Saturday. He did come on. And the Blackburn striker, whose name I can't, Sam Smodic. I mean, again, a top player. I think Ipswich stand the best chance of all three of them staying up. I think Leicester they're going to probably lose points anyway. So I think they will go down, and I suspect Southampton won't have enough to stay up. So I mean, do you fear being in the relegation struggle this season?
I don't think so. And it's weird saying that, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but it's one of the first times where I'm thinking, at the start of last season, I was like, well, it's going to be close. But towards the end of last season, I thought, well, this side, what Iriola's done is he's got an attractive style of play. Everybody's working really hard. They're pressing from the front. They're controlling games. They're dictating the style of play on the other side. Whereas what Gary O'Neill did beforehand was he was like, right, okay, we're playing against this side. Take Everton for example. We're playing against this side. We'll play a little bit deeper, make sure that we stop the ball, get into the big man, and that kind of worked. There's these two managers that are very, they go, they want to dictate that style of play, and you've got those ones that want to react to what the other team are like. So I think Iriola is that first one where he will play on the front foot and play that pressing style of football. But I don't think we will. And to be honest, Ian, I agree with you on Ipswich. I agree with you on Ipswich completely. Because I think I spoke to Omid Jalili, the comedian.
Oh,
And yeah, Omid it's really because of the momentum that they've had as well. Why, he feels that they should be fine. They should be fine. They're making good signings, like
Is
you
he an
say.
Ipswich fan?
Well, this is one thing that we started with. He's actually a Chelsea fan that's moved to Suffolk. So he's actually, to be honest, he's got a foot in both camps. But yeah, he's been watching Ipswich. And
That was one of the first stadiums I ever went to, Portman Road, when I was 12. You won't remember this, but there used to be a thing called the Texaco Cup. And I think it was played, I don't know if it was pre-season or certainly the first part of the season. And Ipswich were playing Newcastle. And so, because I lived about 30 miles from Ipswich, so my dad took me to Ipswich. And that was my first experience of a big match. I said big match. I mean, the stadium wasn't full, but and I got really carried away and started shouting at the referee. And I think my dad was very embarrassed.
Well, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll both have a very, very good season this year. And of course, you're back on LBC. When's the next podcast coming out?
Well, I do one called For the Many, which is a weekly review of the news and politics. And I was doing it with Jackie Smith, the former Labour Home Secretary, but she got made a peer by Keir Starmer. She's now the universities minister, so she's had to drop out of doing that. So I'm basically auditioning every week a different female lefty to be my sort of foil on the podcast. So I'm calling it my slutty phase. So I've got all sorts of different people. I've done Harriet Harman. When I say done, I use that word advisedly. Sangam Debonair. We've got Nicola Sturgeon coming up, Kirsty Walk, Gillian Keegan, Penny Mordaunt, although they're obviously not on the left. So I've then got to decide sort of who should be her permanent replacement. The trouble is that Jackie and I have this sort of unique chemistry, which I'm not sure is going to work with any of the others. So anyway, we'll see.
Fair enough, Ian. Well, all the very, very best for that, and also release of the Dictators. In the description below is a way for you to order the book and also get it signed by Ian as well. And no doubt we'll catch up just down the road from here as well. And I believe I'm just having a quick look. It's on the 21st of September at 2 p.m.
21st of September. Well, I'm doing two events then, and the 2 p.m. one at Budley Salterton. I'm interviewing Sir Vernon Boltonor about his book. Which is on sort of 6 different people who've influenced politics over the last 50 years. And then my event is at 5:45, my lecture.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to it, Ian, and no doubt I'll catch up with you there. But it's been a pleasure, as always, to have you on the show. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember, hit the like, subscribe, and the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here on Up the Cherries in all departments. Now, do also remember, we have done a lot of other interviews with special guests. Of course, Harry's been on the show. He talked about what he expects for AFC Bournemouth and West Ham. So, West Ham fans, go and check that out and see what your former manager thinks you're going to get up to this year. Also, do check out the other interviews we've done. We've also had Chris Akabusi, who's a West Ham fan. that will be in our interviews tab on our main page. We've also had Richard Archer from Hardfight, Adam Devlin from the Blue Tones, Richie Neville from Five, Tom Meehan, former Kasabian frontman, Omid Jalili, who was mentioned, of course, an Ipswich fan and comedian. And of course, he talks about that overhead kick that Vinnie Jones then put in the back of the net. And we've had so many more. I could be here all day if I named them. So please hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the bell button. It means the world to us. All the very, very best for both clubs for the Premier League season. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we can both have really good years. But hopefully, FC Bournemouth will be in the next round of the Cup. Fingers crossed. Thank you for joining us, and up the Cherries.
The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.